In the last video on the Maya time editor, I talked about how to create an animation sequence on a fuse character that we brought into Mixamo, downloaded several motion capture clips, and then imported them here into Maya as sources that we could use in the time editor to mix an animation where the character idles for a couple of cycles, then he crouches, starts to run, and gets hit by something where he loses his balance a little bit, and then he rights his balance and starts running fast again. So it's basically a race sequence where somebody pushed him as he began, or he tripped. So this is the sequence that we have, and it looks fine. We did all the transitions and everything, and we saved it out as a clip. We exported it as a clip that is an FBX file, and it's called Surfer Dude Race Sequence 2. So look at that video. If you haven't watched that video, I would watch that video first. We're going to use this sequence that you just saw inside of Maya to create a control rig that has the sequence on it. And the reason we need a control rig is because if I go and create a plane here and scale it up to maybe 100 units in X and Z to make a ground plane, what you're going to see is that as this character runs, he actually goes down into the ground. So you can see as he's progressed in his animation, he's getting lower and lower in Y. And he's actually going halfway down into the ground. He starts out fine. You can see he's on the ground. I put a directional light and a point light in there so you can see the lighting. I'm using all lights with shadows here. And so you can see the shadow coming off of him there, that it's right at his feet. So he is on the ground at the beginning of the animation. But as these animations were appended in the time editor, they've moved the character down in Y. And that might have happened just because of the way they were created. So we have to fix that. And to fix that, I have to be able to control the character on top of the motion capture animation. So I need to have layers of animation where the motion capture animation is at the base layer, and then I can fix these things by animating on top of it. And for that, I need a control rig. And currently, this character has no control rig. All it has is the body. It's got a group node at the top named Surfer Dude. It's got several body pieces that came from Fuse. And then it's got the animation rig, which starts at the hips and goes down through the spine and everything. It's actually not much of a rig. It's just a skeleton. But it is controlling all his movements, and that was created in Mixamo. So we need to add a control rig on top of this basic skeleton rig. And to do that, we're going to use Human IK inside of Maya. So begin by selecting your hips skeleton, which is often called the root joint. And it's the really big one here that you can select very easily in the interface. And we've already saved out the sequence as a FBX skeleton. So that's been recorded, and we don't really need that on this character any longer. So when we actually go and create the control rig, it's going to wipe that out. And that's fine because we don't really need it. So the first thing you do is open up your Human IK, which is going to be under Windows Animation Editors, Human IK. And you can see when I open this up that if I look under character, there's nothing there. So there are no characters currently in this scene. And I want to create a character out of this skeleton. And the way you do that is you make sure you select the hips part of this. And you're going to find in the menu here under Create, you're going to find where it says Create Character Definition. We don't need to create a skeleton. We don't need to create a control rig right now. All we need to do is create a character definition. So click on that with the hips selected. And when you do that, it's going to switch over to this view, and you'll see you have character 1. And we can go ahead and go to the upper left corner of this window, this Human IK window, and there is a symbol of a character and a drop-down menu. So just click on that drop-down menu, and let's rename that character to be Surfer Dude. And actually, I'll put character on there because I think we're using the name Surfer Dude on the actual group node for this character. So we'll put Surfer Dude character and say OK. Now you see the source says none, and that's fine. What I need to do to load up and make sure that this is actually a character definition is it has to map all the joints over here that came from Mixamo onto what would be the Human IK setup. So to do that, in the icons that are at the top here, you'll find one that looks like a folder, and it's for loading a skeleton definition. And so click on that folder. It might give you an error message if you don't have the hips selected. It's going to say you must select at least one bone in the skeleton before you can map, use the mapping template. So, okay, we'll go back and select the hips again. It automatically deselected it when I created the character. And so we'll click on the folder again, and the template that I want to load up is HIK. Everyone has this. This is part of the Human IK setup. So just look in the menu. You will have an HIK, and just load that, choose that template, and say OK. And you'll see it should turn green. If it came in from Mixamo and it's in its T-pose, and that's important, you have to have it in your T-pose. Do not do it when you're in some other part of your animation. If you're out here in the middle of your motion capture animation and you try to put the character definition on it, you're going to get some problems where things are going to turn yellow, which means it's not mapping correctly. It is looking to have it in the T-pose when you do the mapping, and it should turn all green. And all green means that it found a match between all the different parts of the Mixamo skeleton and the Human IK template. So once you have that, you can go in and create a character rig for it by simply going up to the top and where it says Source None, simply go and click on that and choose Control Rig. It will create a control rig if I zoom in on it. You can now see that there are some different parts there for this character. Let's just go and select his body and we'll frame it so that we're right on it there. And so we can see that there are some little balls here, and this depends on how you have your control rig showing up. So if you look under Edit Control Rig in the top left menu of that Human IK window, you'll find that you have a rig look, and you have a choice between wire, which looks like this. You can choose rig look stick, which actually has what they call sticks for the joints and little spheres for the actual main control points. I like this one better because if you have joints, it's going to look, they're kind of going to obscure some of these spheres. If it's just a narrow, what they call a stick, then it's easier to see the spheres and therefore click them in the 3D view. And you can see as I do that, it's actually highlighting them over here in the graphical view. So I like the graphical user interface, but you're not going to want to use it all the time. It's very easy to see the different parts. You can click on the actual sticks too, as well as the little spheres. And you can do the same thing in the 3D view out here by just clicking around. And you can see that's the left wrist. So, and if we were to look down here in the outliner, you'll see that there's, now that I've created a control rig, there's a whole section here that says Surfer Dude Character Control Reference. And as I click around here, you'll see things highlighting up in this area. And I could select things over here too, the left elbow, the end of the left foot, the left shoulder, and they're highlighting over here, and they're highlighting in the 3D view. So you have three different ways that you can select your different parts of the control rig. And if I select a part of the control rig and I move it, you can see it moves the character. And he moves in a ragdoll fashion. And his arms and limbs bend. And you know, it didn't rebind the character or anything. So if it looked good in your motion capture animation, it's going to look good now. It's just that you have these little objects that you can control it with. And there is one called Box 2, which makes everything kind of big and blocky, all the different controls kind of big and blocky. Again, I don't like that one as much as I like the stick one, because it's easier for me to see where the main pivots are on all the different skeleton limb joints. So that's the one I like to use. You can choose whatever you want. And you're going to also use these other two areas of the outliner and the Human IK graphical user interface. So If I move my timeline, you'll notice the character does not move with the animation anymore. And that is because the control rig is overriding the animation that I put on the skeleton joints. As soon as you make it, it's going to override it because that's the source now. So what we have to do is we have to give it a new source, which is the animation sequence that I exported out. So we're going to bring that back in and we're going to make it the control source. And then we're going to bake it to this control rig. This will allow us to have the animation on the control rig, but then also be able to animate the control rig on top of that and fix the problems that we might get through putting together different sequences. So to do that, I'm going to import in that other animation. I'll go ahead and go to the top and go to File, and we'll go to Import. And I'm going to open up the options. And so I'm going to use FBX again, but I'm going to open up my edit preset on the FBX because you do need to change some things here. When we were importing animations from Mixamo, we used update animation as our file content under the include area of the FBX import settings. Now what we need to do is change that to just add. We want to add in the sequence that I exported out from Maya as an FBX. And so that's going to bring it in as a skeleton. We didn't export the model, we just exported the skeleton animation. And it'll bring it in as a skeleton that we can then use as a source to retarget to this other character control rig. It's the same character, and it's somewhat important that it matches up, so you can retarget from other characters, and that does often work, but this is the same character. So it should work perfectly. So we have animation turned on, and the only thing I'm going to look at down here is we were using scale units converted to feet. But I already had the scaling correct when I was inside of Maya because this is what I used to import the other ones coming from Mixamo so that they weren't too big. I'm going to turn it to automatic because I exported out with that feet setting from Maya. And so it should just automatically recognize and come in perfectly scaled for our current character. So I'll go ahead and try that and see how it goes. All I need to do is close this and import. Now what I want to do is go and find that. I know that it was in I exported that out into my time editor folder into clip exports, and it was called Surfer Dude Race Sequence 2. And I'll go ahead and I can check those import settings again to make sure that it does say add under file content, and at the bottom that it's saying automatic is the scale factor. And I'll import that in. And I can see that something happened. A skeleton is sitting on top of this control rig. And if I move the timeline, you can see that it's there and it's doing the animation. So it looks fine. If I look in my outliner, I should find a new group node here. And if I open it up, I'll see that it's the race sequence and it has a skeleton associated with it and it's got animation on it. And it has the motion capture animation because it's a baked animation with a keyframe on every frame. Now I could go ahead and name this group node for this. Let's call it Surfer Dude Sequence 1. And what I need to do to this is make sure that it's in its T-pose at the frame 0 on the timeline. And I'm going to make a character out of it. So I'm going to go back to my human IK window, and at the top here, I want to set this character back to none. So click on the drop-down menu, choose none, and you'll see that it takes you back to this menu, and we can create another character definition. Make sure you have the new skeleton selected, and you need to select the hips joint or the root joint of that skeleton. All right, so find the skeleton part, open it up, and find the skeleton, the very top root joint of the hierarchy for the skeleton, and then click Create Character Definition. You can do the same thing you did before. Find the folder. If it does the same error message because it's kind of a not the greatest user interface action when it unselects it every time you do that, because you are going to want to load it up immediately. So you have to go back, select that hips again, and click on the folder and choose the HIK template. Say OK to that. Should turn green. If it's in the T-pose, it will turn green. And that's all you need to do. It's now a character named Character 1. We can go into our menu again for the human IK, go to Rename Character, and we'll call this one, let's call it Surfer Dude Driver Anim. Surfer Dude Driver Anim. I'll say OK to that. So I have now a character called Surfer Dude Driver Anim. It has all the animation on it. And I'm going to go and click under Character, find my other Surfer Dude character and select it. It's using a control rig currently. I want to click on that where it says Source, the drop down where it says Source, and now I'm going to make the driver the Surfer Dude driver animation that I just created. Once I do that, I might see something change on the skeleton. But if I play the timeline, I'll see that he's now animating with that animation. And it looks fine. It looks like it's all there. Now, I do notice that some things happened when I retargeted the original animation to the character with the control rig. I put that light in here with a shadow on it for a reason, so that I could see more easily if he's not sitting on the ground. So I can see that the retargeting actually lifted him off the ground at the beginning. So I'm going to need to put him back down on the ground for the start of this animation. And then I'll have to adjust the other parts where he goes down in the ground. So everything else looks fine. It looks a little weird because the skeletons moved off, they offset a little bit, but that doesn't matter. The animation looks fine. Now it's using that imported animation as the source for the character. That means there's no control rig anymore on that character because that's not the source. We have to take this animation and bake it to the control rig so that you have a control rig, but there's animation on it. I want to have both, and right now I don't have both. It's either I use the control rig and then I can sort of move, I can choose it and move them around, and that's, I can click on it and I can drag it and I can animate him manually, but when I do that, he doesn't have the animation. And if I switch it to the surfer dude driver animation as the source, then he has the animation, but he doesn't have a control rig anymore. Even if I select like his arm here, it's not selecting his arm. So I need to have both in order to animate with both. And so once you put this on as a source so that we have the animation retargeted and he's moving with it, then what we have to do, put him back in his T-pose, and we're going to bake it to the control rig. And that you find also in the menu here for the human IK. You'll find a bake section, and we want to bake to control rig. Now for this, I would find your main surfer dude character in the outliner, and then go and click on the hips of that character. Then go to the human IK menu, choose bake, and bake to control rig. Open up the options for that so you can see everything that's there. And the reason we selected the hips over here in the outliner is because we actually need to bake everything. And there is an option here for hierarchy below. And that's actually going to select everything and bake on every part of the skeleton, even though we only have the top hips node selected. Then we're going to use a lot of the default settings here. We do want to bake shapes. We only need to bake the part that has the animation. So, make sure that you check and see what your animation is, how far does it go before it stops, and bake only to that. So it looks like my animation ends right around frame 218. So I don't need to bake anything more than that. So I could set a start and end, or I could just go down here and type in 218 to my time slider and use the time slider range. And then I do want to bake to a base animation for this character. I'm going to sample it on a step of 1 so it does every frame. And I think I'm going to use the basic settings, the default settings, keep unbaked keys, unroll rotation, and disable implicit control all turned on. and then just hit bake. So if I put this back at the 0 key and I hit bake, you're going to see it go through the entire animation. And as it's doing that, it's baking it to the control rig. And there you see that there's animation now. And if I go down here, you can see that what's currently selected is the hips of the character. And it has all the animation on that hip effector, on that hip control. And you'll see that on every single one of the control objects that you select has the animation baked to it. That is the base layer of the animation, and you should test it out and take a look at it and make sure that it baked correctly, that it looks like nothing went wrong in the baking process. So I would say that this looks correct to me. Looks like it's all there. And so next, I've got now a control rig on my character, but it also has the animation because the animation's on the control rig. And I'm going to animate the character using the control rig. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to fix some things that are not right about the animation. So if I zoom in, you'll see again he's up off the ground. Now I can control this most easily by this top node. So on the human IK controls, that's the one right between the feet. And it's the top control reference. It actually does not have any keyframes on it. And if I move that down till his feet sit on the ground, then it will actually move it permanently for the whole sequence. Now that's not fixing the fact that he's going into the ground. In fact, that's probably making it worse. It's fine. I can see at the beginning here where he's tapping his foot. That looks like it's okay. And it looks like it starts right when he starts to crouch. He goes down into the ground there. So I can fix that by animating the different parts of the character. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do that on top of the main animation here. So I have the motion capture animation. It's baked to the first layer of this control rig. If I go back to my channel box, we're going to animate on top of that on an additional layer here. And we've used layers before for display. And in fact, I probably would want to do some things in here to clean up my display if I'm going to start animating. The sequence that I had earlier, which is actually in the exact same place, but it's not connected anymore to this character. I don't need to see that at all. So I could either delete it or I could just Control H, hide it. Because once I start animating, you are going to notice that it's not the same. And then the other thing that I want to do is I probably don't need to see some parts of the character's skeletons and other parts other than the control rig itself. I can select the top hips node of the skeleton and go to the select menu and choose hierarchy, and that's going to select all the different parts of that skeleton. And then I can, under display layers, choose this one on the far right here that says create a new layer and assign selected objects. So I'll do that. And I'll double click that and just call it Surfer Dude Scale or Scales or something like that, and save it. And that just allows me to turn the visibility off on the skeletons so that they are not in my way and I don't accidentally select them or anything when I'm trying to work with the character. Now that I have the character ready to animate, I actually want to use a different type of layer, the animation layer. And I can see that if I click on that over here on the right, that it shows that I have a base animation, and that's where my motion capture animation is. And what I would like to do is create a new layer for all these control reference objects. So I'm just going to select all of these. I'm going to hold the shift key down over in my outliner here and just select all of those control objects. And then I'm going to go and find where it's got the little dot on this animation layers, and I'm going to create a layer from selected. And this is going to be my control layers. Let's just call it Surfer Dude Controls. So that's what I'm going to use to animate on top of the base animation, the base mocap animation. So if the feet look fine up until this point right here, then I want to set a keyframe for them right before they start to go down into the ground. So it looks like right around 120 they're good, and then right around 121 or 122 they start to go down into the ground. So I'm just going to hit S on the keyboard. And I see result 9. Now actually, let's select the hips as well. I'm going to hit S there as well and see what it says. Result 357. Okay. So I want to make sure that I'm setting a key on everything that I need to set it on before it starts going into the ground, because I'm not sure what I'm going to move around. I could just move around the top node, or I might move around the feet controls or the hips control. I might want to adjust the hands, so I'm actually going to sort of set keys on everything. And what it says down here on your command feedback is going to tell you whether it's set all of those different controls or not. So as this guy goes down into the ground, I can see that, okay, I probably need to fix that. Now we could move the whole character up here. and hit S again. And let's go see what that looks like. And I can see in the middle here, it's also kind of in the ground in between the keys. And it's one foot is more in the ground than the other. So I may want to actually go to that next key, and I'm going to hit S for all the keys. I'm going to go back a little bit in between, and I'm just going to adjust the feet directly here. So I'm going to move this foot up a little bit, and I'm going to take the other one. And I could have the human IK up at this point and use this GUI over here as well. And I can click on things in my outliner too. So I have 3 different areas that I can select things and move them around. And if I'm moving that up, maybe I would want to grab the hips and adjust it a little bit too. It's up to me. How I do that, I can hit S again, and we can see what that is doing on the feet now. Okay, those look pretty good. They're not going into the ground much anymore. And as I go forward, they look okay right here. They're going a little bit into the ground right there. And then they definitely go into the ground when he hits his toe down. So I think that I need to go to the point where I think they look okay, which is right there on frame 134. And let's hit S again on these. I'm going to go forward a little bit. His toes kind of in the ground. I'm going to adjust that straight from his back leg control. And so we'll look at it a little bit more from the side. I can see his toes very far into the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that up a little bit. I think the front foot looks fine. It may be that it needs to go up a little bit too. And I'll hit S again. And then I'll scrub it back and take a look. All right, now as he goes through that foot, it looks like it is going down into the ground a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it up. And I might want to actually bring the whole character up, but you can see that this node, which is the top control reference node, it's going to stay back here. It's going to stay at the origin point. It's not going to move with the character. So you're not going to want to do a whole lot with it in your animation. The only thing that you might want to do with it is animate it up and down like this in Y. You probably aren't going to do any rotations with it. You're not probably going to do X or Z translation with it. But you might actually want to animate it in Y a little bit. So for instance, if I go back here, I might go ahead and hit S and keyframe that in Y. And when he comes up here and he's really putting his foot down, I might want to move that up just slightly. That's going to move the whole character up. So I have to be careful that it doesn't do anything weird. But really, as he rolls through that foot, the more appropriate thing for me is to go to the foot itself and maybe raise that up a little bit. And if I feel like the hips need to go up, I might take those up a little bit more too. As he rolls through that foot, I notice it's going down into the ground a little bit, so I might want to go ahead and pull that up. You might want to open up your move tool here when you're doing this and adjust some things about it. Right now, I'm using object, which is usually a lot of times what you would want. But if I just want to move this up and down, and the main thing that I'm doing is fixing the y-axis, it might actually be better for me to go ahead and switch it to world, in which case the y is always just going straight up. Otherwise, I'm moving it along the joint axis, which may change it, like it might change the pose too much to do that. Okay, so I've raised that up a little bit, and again I would hit S. And here he really drops down. That's where he gets hit by something. So it's a different clip, and that clip must have a very different setting in Y, because he's really going down into the ground with it. I think it's probably fine right here where he kind of starts. So I'll go to that next frame, and I'm going to go and set a keyframe on the reference node. The reference node is again way back here, so I might want to zoom out and then go forward with it, and he drops into the ground there like he's stepping into quicksand. And I may want to go ahead and fix that problem directly on the reference node. The advantage of using the reference node is that I don't have to move each individual body part, the feet and the hips, as much. So if I can do that and it looks okay, you know, if it looks accurate, he's hitting the ground there, and then he looks like he's hitting the ground here. There's a little bit of a slide there, but it's not noticeable from the camera angle that I had it on before, and it probably would not be noticeable when this is animating at full speed. But he is sliding a little bit there. It might be actually accurate because he got hit. So that's actually part of the hit. And then he kind of crosses his legs and goes to the side. And all of that looks good. He's not going into the ground, but then here he goes into the ground. So up to about right there, it looks fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit S again on that reference node. And then I'm going to go forward. And as he drops into the ground, right about there, let's pull that up. And that looks better. Now I do see that his toes kind of falling into the ground there. So I could make some individual adjustments on say the foot itself here, key it in that current position, and then as it drops down into the ground right there, I could just adjust that one foot up a little bit. But then he's back in the ground again on that next step. So let's go back to the reference node, which is, I think, probably the easiest way I can fix that, and just move him up a little bit until he's standing on the ground again, and hit S. Okay, so if I play that, if I look at it again, say from this angle, he's on the ground, and I fixed all of those. And there's a little bit of weirdness right there, but that's where he's starting to drop again. So let's try to fix that. Pull him back up again. And here he kind of compensates a little bit, maybe too much. He's actually looks like that's where the heel should be hitting on the ground right there. So I think I actually overshot that a little bit. I'm going to Control Z to undo that key and go back and find the place where the heel is going on the ground and go up and keyframe it there instead, because that's where he's really hitting down, right there. And then I might actually need to put another one. There is a little bit of a weird moving up in between these two frames. So I think that I would want to go back. And I might even want to do that on the foot itself. So if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and select the foot, hit S, because I hadn't keyframed that in a while, and go a little bit further forward. I want somewhere in between. He's kind of way, and that back foot is not on the ground. Front foot is not really on the ground. And that is kind of and I'll bring that whole thing down a little bit right here. Now it could be that he's bouncing a little bit because he was falling, and it might be that he's actually kind of bouncing off the ground a little bit. But I do think that probably that foot needs to go down a little bit. Actually, that foot's okay right there. So at that point, he should get his balance more correct. Now, I noticed that his foot's in a little bit of a weird angle, this front foot. I can fix those things too. So if there's something in the animation that doesn't look right, and you're going to need to do this when you put more than one character together, you're going to need to make adjustments to the hands and the orientation and everything. So I might want to actually go in there and rotate that foot a little bit, straighten it out. And if I need to move it up a little bit, I can do that too. And then hit S, and it should keyframe both of those things and fix that. Again, he's overall in the ground right now, so I'll go ahead and use the top node for that. So that created a little bit of a compensation when I set that key on there. I'm going to stick with the top node. So I'm probably gonna I will need to go back and look at the animation curves for this. But yeah, that's better. Let's look at that as we play it. So there are still things to fix up, but it's looking much better. He's now on the ground through this animation. And I would just keep fixing these problems by keyframing it on top of the base animation. And we can look at different animation curves here to see what's happening in the timing. And there might be something where we want to make something more linear in here, or something more with a softer curve. They're defaulting to spline-based curves. If, for instance, if I see something where I think it might be compensating, like here. So between these 2 points of the curve, he's easing into it and then he's easing out of it. And it may be that I want it to stay steady for a longer period where the foot is not bouncing up like that. So I could go to this curve here and right click it and break that tangent so that I can select this handle independently and move it with the middle mouse button so it's going to be flatter. And if it's flatter, then it shouldn't move as much. So I'm seeing this particular curve is the translate Y curve. And that's the thing that I've been animating most, and it's on the top of this character. If I want it to stay steady, steady is flat on this curve. So if it's actually up here, it's not, it's actually moving in Y. And this is the most intuitive one that you could do because the shape of this curve actually matches the type of movement. But if I want it to stay steadier, then I would want to have this more flat right here. And I could take this one too and adjust it so that maybe it's dipping a little bit more. I'd have to look and see what's this next move. Okay, it's going to come up. But that, and this is for the whole character, so I don't necessarily want it to come up too much. I might also want to look at this on the actual foot that I'm looking at here. Translate Y curve. And I can see that actually it's flat there. So there's not any up and down happening from this particular curve. It's all happening from that full body curve. So you're going to need to look at those to adjust some of the keyframes to make it as good as possible.